Hey there, everybody. This is Beyond the Beach, Career Conversations with Graduates of Cal State Long Beach. I'm your host, Kenji Klein, Associate Professor of Management at the College of Business at California State University, Long Beach, where I teach business strategy, general management, and organization theory. In this show, I interview former students and recent graduates about life after Long Beach. Our conversations cover topics like how my guests chose a career path, how they landed their first job, and what it's been like to navigate the chaos, challenges, and opportunities of their early careers. My hope is that by hearing the stories of real people who were in your exact shoes just a few years ago, you can get an honest and realistic picture of what might be out there for you beyond the beach. My guest today is Ashleigh Hehmann. Ashleigh was a student in my business strategy class back in 2014. After spending some time in the corporate world, Ashleigh chose to return to a career she truly loves and now works as a bartender at Accomplice Bar. Outside of her work at Accomplice Bar, Ashleigh does competitive bartending and has been selected to represent the United States in the Patron Perfectionist bartending competition this upcoming May. Hey, Ashleigh, it's really great to have you here.
It's really great to be here. I'm glad to be a part of this, and I think what you're doing is really great. I wish it would have existed when I was back in school.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
and that's the exact reason why I'm doing it, right?
Yeah.
Because I do have a lot of current students that are like, I don't know what's out there. So
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of paths that are dictated for you, what you think you should be doing, and I think knowing what is really out there is like, it's good.
Yeah, cool. So let me just start by asking you if you could just briefly introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, when you graduated, maybe what your major or concentration was, and then what you're doing now.
Okay, so I'm Ashleigh Hehmann. Like you said, I graduated in 2015 with my degree from business management. Right now, I am currently a bartender at Accomplice Bar. And I've been in Long Beach now for the last 10 years. And yeah, I've been competitive bartending. I work with the USBG, which is the United States Bartenders Guild. And I work towards advocating for not only mental health, but also getting resources out to young bartenders and to create a more inclusive community, as well as education and bringing access to resources that I did not know were available when I was coming up in my career.
That's cool. So a couple things jump out at me.
Yeah.
The first one was there's a guild for bartenders?
Yes, it's been around a long time, 75 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so another thing I did not know existed until well into my career as a bartender.
And then did you know that when you, because when you were a student, right, I knew that you were bartending at that point as well, right, part-time. And so did you know at that point that there was a guild?
No.
Okay.
I didn't actually find out that there was a guild until a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of different resources and a lot of opportunities that were not either available or presented to me.
Got it.
That I didn't find until really delving into different aspects, which we can get into in a little bit, because it was a very much a journey.
Okay, yeah, and I'd like to talk about the journey too, because I know that, right, when you first graduated, you didn't immediately go full-time into what you're doing now. And so, but then eventually you shifted. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Tell me a little bit about that first job after graduating, like how you found it, what it was.
Okay.
And also a little bit about like why you left.
Sure. So I was approached by an electrical distribution company at a career fair here on campus, and it was presented as this management training program. It was going to be over the process of a year. And so they were going to go through different stages of development. I started in accounts payable and receivables. Okay. And then you would go through sales, outside sales, and then eventual management of an entire division or particular unit. They said, no, you don't need to know anything about electrical. Not my necessary interest, but they made it out to be very glamorous. Like, we put together these projects, like Hollywood style type of thing. And I was like, well, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm going to learn a lot, because there's so many different aspects of running a business, which could be applicable to anything that you plan to do in the future, whether or not you stay there or not. Sure. And so, you know, everyone always saw bartending as a college job. Yeah. Even though, for me, a real career or any job is a job that pays your bills. Yeah, right. But, you know, I left because that's what I thought I had to do. Yeah. And but I got a lot out of that first job. So it started off, I did accounts payables and receivables. Right. Started doing that. And the program very quickly dissolved. So There was a lot of turnover at the location. It was in a warehouse.
Okay.
No AC, no heating, no windows.
Okay. Not as glamorous as you were
Not
thinking.
nearly as good. I was working in a warehouse, basically, driving a forklift, doing all kinds of weird stuff.
Oh, wow,
so there was quite a bit of turnover, and so I ended up doing inside sales. You see air quotes. I know they can't see that.
Yeah.
Which was basically me doing retail level for contractors. Mind you, you need to know a lot about electrical things in order to do that. And so that was interesting. I had one of my coworkers at that time had been in the industry for a really long time, and he was looking to get out and become a foreman for the oil plants out here.
Okay.
And so he was like, I'm going to teach you everything I know. And so he would put me on calls with his large, because he was a commissioned salesperson, so he would put me on calls with some of his larger customers and contractors. And so I built a rapport with them through him. And he's like, I'll teach you all the slang, all the,
Right.
And so it was interesting because people didn't want to work with me in that industry because I was a female.
Really?
I ended up working, which we'll kind of get into later, how I ended up back in the industry a couple times. But I was the only outside female salesperson that wasn't doing quotations in all 3 worldwide companies I worked for at that time.
Wow. And then how big was this company?
Worldwide.
So they're a big company.
Yes, yeah.
And so it's like, and it's basically just a matter of, it's an industry that's just traditionally been like a male industry, electricians kind of thing.
Yes.
And and it wasn't just that they didn't treat you like the way that they would treat other people. It was like they didn't want to work with you?
No, I mean, there was a lot of times that they would ask, is there a man available to talk to? Or would immediately talk to the first person that was a male available, which would be like a driver who was 16.
Right.
So there was, it was really interesting, but it made I learned a lot from it because I had to navigate in a way to learn how to work around that.
Sure.
And so I learned quite a bit from that, which is not unlike the hospitality industry. That's changed a lot over the last, 13 years that I've been doing it. But it's still something that's prevalent in certain areas, and I can get into that because I had a recent experience dealing with that. But that being said, a lot of change has spurred from that, and I see that changing quite a bit.
Right.
And I developed some close relationships with a lot of those contractors, and that's how I ended up back in it after leaving. So I got a very small salary, and I could see that I was not going to go through this program that they said I was going to go through, especially not at the rate in which they were saying it. I am not a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. person.
Okay, right.
Let alone in a building with no windows that can get, freezing cold. So I left and went back to the bar I was at kind of with my head.
So wait, you're telling me that the lack of air conditioning, the lack of heating, the poor salary, and the mistreatment was enough for you to not want to do this anymore?
I stayed so much longer than anyone would think is reasonable just to prove to myself, I'm going to show them I can do it type of thing. And there were certain aspects of it, though, that I did enjoy. It was more of I think it was the hospitality part.
Okay.
To be honest, being reliable and making sure people's things were able to get done and taking care of people and them trusting you and knowing that you would help them make their life easier. So that was kind of cool.
So delivering for people, the customers.
Oh, yeah, I would haul conduit. I cut wire. I drove a forklift at a certain point. Not with the license, but,
Okay.
That's besides the point.
Maybe I'll have to edit that one out.
Yeah,
Or a statute of limitations.
Yeah, statute of limitations. I'm not going to name any names, So, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't the field I necessarily was interested in. And the many reasons we discussed, I went back to the bar I was previously at.
Okay.
And
so how long was it that you were in that electrical?
I didn't make it a year, I'll tell you that much.
Okay.
Maybe like 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I made it longer than a few other people, though. I'll tell you that much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard when you're in a job that's just like miserable. It's really hard to keep going. I have to confess, I have bailed early on some jobs that I was just like, this is just not the happening place.
Yeah, it was more of like a pride thing. I should have known immediately. It was pretty evident from the get-go, but I was like, I'm going to give it a shot. Yeah. This is my first, real job. And, I learned a lot, though. I'm not upset that I did that.
Right. And so then you went, and then you basically stopped doing that, and then you went back to the bar that you had been working at. Had you kept a foot in the door at that bar while you were doing this job, like part-time or something?
Yeah. So what's funny is it's Gallagher's in Long Beach.
Okay.
I'll shout them out. I met my husband there. I built a community there. It was actually the first bar I ever stopped at in Long Beach.
Okay.
And it wasn't until years later I ended up actually working there, like serendipitously through people I knew from back home, because I'm from Lancaster, which is not that far.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I still maintain a relationship with that entire, the staff, the owners. And so, yeah, I went back there a couple of times. You know, they were always more than happy, like, to accept me. The customers, you have your regulars still to this day.
Sure.
So I walk in, it's like a Cheers.
Yeah.
Kind of where you're always going to know somebody, and if you don't, we're going to make sure that you do.
Right.
And so it allowed me to not only, you know, have a sense of security in that way where I knew, hey, at least I can pay my rent until I figure out where I want to focus.
Right.
But it also, you know, it fostered community.
Yeah. Did I don't know if I mentioned it. My dad was a bartender.
No, you did not.
Yeah, so that his whole life.
Career bartender.
Well, as long as I've been alive, I was alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a bartender. That's what he did, and it was all neighborhood bars. And he worked the morning shift. So
you know what though? I don't hate the morning shifts.
He liked
I
it.
do and I don't.
Yeah, he liked it. For him, it was good because he'd get up early, he'd get it done, he'd go home early, and then he'd have the whole day. And he was, you know, single father raising me for a lot of the time, so he wanted to be around when I got home from school and stuff.
Which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
But,
it's nice. It's a different. You get to have different interactions with people.
Right.
So I like doing both because one is like, let's go, you know, and you get to have that like high, and which is more my style.
Right.
But sometimes it's nice to be able to like build those connections, and you get time to like R&D,
Yeah.
cocktails and do things like that.
Yeah.
So it's
Interesting. So then you went back, and then you stayed there for how long, or what did you do? When you were there, were you thinking to yourself, this is just a temporary thing, I got to reorient and figure out how I'm going to get back into the corporate world because, after all, I got this business degree.
right.
Or were you like, maybe I should do something in hospitality because it seems to match? Like, what was going on in your head at the time?
I mean, I think I always kind of knew that's where I wanted to be. I mean, even as a little kid, I was always like, I'm going to order for everybody. And like, I wanted to be a chef, and I would go around and I'd like take everyone's order at like 8 years old and walk up to the counter. And it was just always something, you know, people like, you were meant to do this. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult.
Right.
And now, like, I very much see it as a compliment, you know. So I went back there, though. At that point, I still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. But I went there and kind of, to reorient and see where I was at. And then I got a call from a different electrical supply company that was a competitor to the first one. And they said, hey, you know, I had moved away. I came back to run this spot.
Right.
All of my old customers weren't coming to my place because they said some chick up the street was taking care of them. So why don't you come join my team as outside sales? And so he offered me quite a large salary bump and autonomy and commission.
Okay.
So I was like, I'll consider it, you know.
Yeah.
And he was very down to earth, was very, you know, straightforward about everything. And so I ended up going back and doing that like right across the street with a different company.
Okay.
And was there for quite a bit. And then he ended up leaving to start his own division in Huntington Beach with another larger corporation that kind of did more commercial things as well.
Yeah.
And so he was like, I want you on my team. So he brought me over there and then helped me to negotiate a salary. And then the other company I was at said, no, we'll pay you even more.
Okay.
And then they said, we'll pay you even more. And I don't think anyone knew what I was actually going to do at this place, which was very interesting. Huh. And so I ended up moving over with him because he was really the whole reason I was there in the first place, was because he was like, I'm going to foster a career for you. I'm going to see you do well. He was a single dad, and I think he just saw a woman in this industry and was like, yeah, you know, I'm going to help you out.
Yeah.
And so went over there, and they were restructuring this company, and I don't think they really knew what they wanted. And so I ended up sitting in a room getting paid quite a bit of money to do absolutely nothing.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, hey, y'all, I'm not doing anything in here at all. And they're like, okay. I got told I was the quietest person they ever met. And I was like, clearly that shows you that you have no idea who I am.
Right.
And so, you know, I just built complacency. So then I started creating a small business while I was there because I was like, well, if I'm going to be here, I might as well be doing something productive. Cold calling, like I talked about before, is not so easy, especially as a woman. And I'd have, my suppliers walk past me, not talk to me, thinking I'm a secretary, clearly.
Right.
Talking to whatever male's there, and I would hand my card on the way out, and they would go confused, like, why is a secretary handing me her business card? And then see I was in outside sales, and then realize they're supposed to be selling to me.
Right.
And, let me take you out to lunch, let me do it. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm never going to buy from
Right,
you.
you already made a really great impression.
Yeah, and so I was like, I'm not the type that can just sit in a room.
Yeah.
And so I don't care how much they paid me, which it wasn't that much, but it was a good amount of money.
Right.
And I got full benefits, commission, and there was so much restructuring around there. I don't think they really knew what I was even hired for in the first place.
Yeah.
And so that was when I started working on a small vintage business, which I still kind of dabble in a little bit, and left there.
Oh, I remember this because I think the last time I had checked in with students,
Yeah.
right, like a few years back, that's what you were doing when you would message me.
Yeah, so that's what I was doing in my spare time, sitting in
Right.
this white room
Okay.
alone, and I was like, I'm going to make use of my time then.
So a couple things jump out at me, right? A couple things jump out at me about this. So even though eventually, right, this isn't the career you're going to stay in, right? I think it's really telling that, like, the attitude that you had at that first job, where you were like, you're going to deliver for your customers, right? Because this is part of maybe that hospitality mentality,
Yeah.
right? I want to make sure that my customers get what they need, and you were doing that and hustling to make sure that that happened. Clearly meant something to people, right?
It was awesome, because when I did outside sales, the second place that I worked before we moved to that final place, I was able to move around. So I didn't have a set schedule.
Right.
I can kind of, as long as I got the work done and however I got it done, which meant, sometimes coming in at 5 a.m. and loading up conduit and driving down to Malibu or whatever it may be, because every time they needed it yesterday, they needed all this yesterday. And then I got to put together large quotations, which was really cool. So there was a lot of things that wouldn't seem transferable that really were. So especially if you're doing like event coordination, or you're doing bulk orders, so you're putting together quotations. So you're working with different distributors and figuring out how you can make the deal, put together packages, and then compete against other people who are putting together packages, while adding in that added value of, are you going to be there to take care of me?
Right.
And it was so much so where I had one of my customers calling, and I'm literally about to go get married. And I'm like, I'm about to walk down the aisle. Can I call you later, sir? Like, and there's nothing that's that important,
Right.
And at that point, it's just, yeah.
That's really crazy. So, but you took the call, which is.
I did.
No, I'm just curious how your fiance felt about
Well,
that.
okay, so we did a courthouse, he and I, and then we came back and had a big wedding. It wasn't at the wedding, yeah. We were driving around trying to be like,
I think I might have been like, if that had happened to me, I might be, really? You're going to take this call?
Yeah. It was more so to be like, are you seriously calling me right now? Like, my phone's going to be off for the next week. Like, leave me alone.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But again, so the point being, though, that's like the fact that you have this mindset, right, that you want to make sure that the customers are getting what they want and they're getting what they need and you're taking care of them, establish a reputation so that you got called, right? And this person's like, we want to hire you. And people were saying, like, yeah, we're not, we're going to this other place because, there's this chick who's taking care of us.
Yeah,
right?
he's like, who is that lady? What, there's a lady back there? What does she do?
But again, it's like that idea that I think, if you really take care of people, it helps, right? It really makes a difference.
And now that I think about it, it was because he was good friends with the guy who was like, you're my protege. The first place, they were friends. He just wasn't living here at that time.
I see.
So that's how he was able to get in contact with me and have my number and all that. So it kind of all is a very weird journey that, a lot of negatives, a lot of positives, but I learned so much.
And the second thing that jumps out at me is that, a lot of people think, wait a minute, you were like getting paid a decent amount of money to not have to do anything? That sounds so wonderful.
So many people said that. And I'm like, it was the worst thing ever. I hated it so much.
Yeah.
I hated it so much. I kept telling them, I do nothing here. Like, I was very vocal about that.
Right.
I'm like, someone tell me what I can, what I can't do. And people were kind of just like, well, okay, we're off doing what we need to do. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to make use of this time.
Right.
And then, started a small, very, very small business reselling vintage clothing, furniture, records, jewelry. My grandma was in antique dealing.
Okay.
So that was something that I was always interested in. I call myself a tinkerer. I kind of just like messing with things and restoring things. And so I had a small space at the antique mall, which I still kind of work with a little bit. I've been very lagging on that lately because I've had a lot going on.
Sure.
and then went back to the bar again in the meantime. And that was when I was finally like, okay, hospitality is what I want to do.
Right.
How can I get really serious about this? And I had managed restaurants and bars before because, like I said, I was in the hospitality industry a long time. Yeah. But I was like, there's got to be something more than this. Right. And so mom and pop shops, I prefer. I'm actually not a big fan of corporate in general. I think there's a lot you can learn from corporate when it comes to organization. Right. And systems that sometimes lack in the smaller businesses. That being said, it doesn't allow for a whole lot of personality. Yeah. And so I like having that kind of interaction with customers, a more genuine interaction with people.
And maybe impact is smaller too, right? Because it's like this big organization, so you don't have as much impact on it.
I think that's also changing. A lot of businesses are restructuring and becoming more personal. But I was like, I always hit a ceiling. There's only so far you can go unless you're the owner, which I kind of knew for a long time that eventually I want to own my own bar. Right. And so I was like, okay, how do I go about learning everything that I can in every different aspect that I can, see different spaces, and then take what I can so that eventually I'll have the know-all to open my own spot without just going. Granted, again, it's one thing to work in the industry, but there's a lot of different things. So I was like, what works? What is my voice? What is my style? Yeah. And what is my, like, what do I want people to feel and see when they come in? Right. And so I had been introduced to craft cocktails my first bar job ever. Okay. And then that was just something that it didn't exist. And women behind the bar didn't really exist. But I was working in this new restaurant, and the bar manager, who I'd never talked to, came up to me and was like, "You want to learn how to bartend?" And I was like, "I can do that?" I was 21. Yeah. I was like, "Yeah." I was making good money as a server there, and I was already managing, doing training and whatnot. Yeah. And so we had this bowling alley in our basement. It was like this new building. And so I worked during the days. And then I, we learned how to free pour, which was awesome. We had Bev & Co., which is a inventory company who would come in and measure all the bottles. Okay. So you had to be on your free pour, which is like a measurement for, what amount of liquid you're pouring.
So basically it's like when you pour without actually like using a measuring cup. Yeah. You know when to stop.
Yeah. And it has to be a quarter ounce, half ounce, 3/4 ounce, 1.5, 2.
So you just need to know how to eyeball that. Just feel it.
Yeah. And so, they would, you would have to calibrate each shift, and then they weigh it. So they know what, they have an outside company do it, but they know where it's going. And you have a margin of error, obviously. Sure. But you had me studying.
Not like 0.0000.
It isn't and isn't. But, and so he put all these classic cocktails out there. And at that point, the classic cocktail scene had been having a renaissance, but not in Lancaster. I didn't know that was a thing. Right. And so this is in 2010. And at that time, we were making, we were using fresh juices, making our own purees. Okay. We had some very interesting cocktails, and that just didn't really exist. And women behind the bar just wasn't really that much of a thing, at least not in certain bars. Sure. Yep. And then I got approached for a sports bar that was in the neighborhood, which is like an insanely busy bar. And they're like, "Hey, turn in an application." And so I'm like, okay. And ended up there, and I made a lot of money there. I was like, oh, wow, this is what it's like. I was like, all right, I'm balling, Right. And so I worked at both and was going to school full time until I burned myself out in that way. And so I had to choose between the two, and I had to go where there was money because, like I had mentioned when we were speaking a little bit earlier, I was paying rent very young and paying my bills very young. And so I knew if I wanted to end up out here to, finish my education, I needed to save up as much as I could. And so, and it was just fun. It was a 360 bar. I was, again, like one of two females behind the bar, and, it was chaos, and it was so much fun, and it was the total opposite of the last place I was at. And very much at that time, sweet and sour on a gun, a lot of mixes, a lot of sugar, a lot of very sexist cocktail names. And, it was just such a different time. Yeah. And fast forward till now, I was like, okay, I'm going to look back into this craft cocktail scene and see where I can get experience. And Long Beach didn't really have a craft cocktail scene a few years ago. Okay. That's changed a lot over the past couple years. But I was like, okay, how am I going to learn some different things? And so delved into that, ended up being a floating manager for a pub and learn more about the management aspect of that. And then when delving...
This is all before you graduated, right?
No, so the second part, no.
The second part, no. Okay.
Yeah, so
this is
after
you, okay.
Yeah.
So the first part about the sports bar and that part was all before.
Prior to Cal State Long Beach,
then you graduated, you did this electrical job.
Yeah.
Then you came back, you were like, I'm going to do hospitality. So that's when this period.
Yeah, so I was like, how can I buckle in and like really make a career out of this?
So so I have a question before we get into that, which is kind of related to that, which is, what was the moment, right, when you were working in the electrical and you decided, you know what, hospitality really is the thing for me? Like, how did that realization come about? How'd you know?
Well, I always went back to it.
Okay.
And sure, it's because what I knew, but I liked it. I loved what I really loved what I do.
Yeah.
And so I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I working in this thing that I don't really like that much? The only part that I even enjoy at all has to do with what I'm already was doing.
Right.
I'm actually not making more money.
Right.
And so why am I not doing that? And it was my pride, you know?
Yeah.
It was that kind of, at that time, that perception that bartending wasn't a real career. It wasn't a real job. It was a, when are you going to get your real job type of thing, or, you know, and I was like, forget that. You know, I'm going to make this my real job. I'm going to make this a career.
So do you think it might have, like, was it an issue of, like, you hit a, like, I think one thing that happens, and it might not be this for you, but I think one thing that happens is when you're younger, you're still, like, hearing all the voices of what other people have told you, right? And then I think you hit a certain point where you hit an age where you're just like, you know what, I don't really care about what those people think.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, oh, I could choose what I actually want to do and not whatever all these outside voices are telling me.
Yeah. I think at that time I had a transition where I had dealt with mental health issues my entire life, mostly depression, but there was some things going on where I'm like, I don't feel right. I'm not happy. This could be the job, but things were just weird. And so I went in and finally got into a decent doctor and a psychologist and was diagnosed bipolar ADHD and OCD. And I was like, wow, that puts so many different things into reference.
Right, into perspective.
And so, you know, during that time, I had one of my first experiences with mania. At least hypomania is a way where you just feel good and you're a little more productive. Where it was a little more like I could hear myself was like, this is too much. You know, I was very much aware of it. I'm lucky in that way that I don't have it to the extent where like I think I'm God.
Right.
But you know, I think that was also a big part of me. One, realizing, because I had to make a lot of life changes at that time. I was like, I got to take care of myself.
Right.
I got to do what makes me happy, not just, you know, physically, mentally, you know, in my career, in my life. I have to, you know, make some choices. And at that point, it kind of shows who's in your life and who's supportive and who's not.
Right.
And who wants you to get better and who wants to keep you not better so that they can feel better type of situation.
Yeah.
And so I think that was also where I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to do what is success to me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take care of my life in the way that I need to take care of my life.
Right.
And so, it was, I wouldn't say like the very bottom or anything like that, but I just learned a lot about myself. I wish I would have known at a much younger age. I think that there are a lot of things, particularly ADHD in women, that you don't get diagnosed because it presents very different.
Interesting.
So I always did very well in school, very well in school, probably part of the OCD counteraction of it, that it was never something that I ever thought that I could be ADHD.
Right.
ADHD kids are
disorganized and they can't get their stuff done and all of that.
Right.
Right. And that's actually so what you're saying is what they're discovering then is that's actually more typical of like a male presentation of ADHD.
Right.
But for women, it's a different experience.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because it's interesting that we're finally getting aware of that because we've known, for example, you know, before that, for example, physical things like heart attacks, right? They women and men experience them completely differently.
100%.
It's a completely different like feeling. So they're realizing, that these other things as well.
I think too, it's a lot of, it also has to do with, you know, the socialization of women and that you're taught, you know, to be compliant and to be quiet and, you know, to be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of these things that don't seem so obvious on the surface, but are a systemic thing that have led to norms that we're now breaking, which is really great to see. But, even in medicine, mental, physical, whatever it may be, all the studying and tests has always been done typically on white males because of consistent results in testing. But what we're finding is different races and different genders don't respond or don't present in the same way. And so there's a lot of issues with diagnoses and treatment.
Right.
But once I finally got that, together, I go, oh, it just made so much sense. Right. It just put everything so much in perspective. And so, it was just about making a life change and, in all kinds of ways.
So it's interesting to me, too, though, because it sounds like it was like you were at a point, though, where there was something about in your life that was like you weren't happy with how it was set up, right? Mm-hmm. And it was that point that you either, got outside perspective or you realized you need to change things. And that's where you sort of discovered these things, found these things, and made choices that were actually better aligned with who you really are.
Yes.
Yeah, which is a really interesting thing, because what it means is, like, we have this tendency to think about, when you're down or you're not feeling good or whatever is bad, that's bad. But actually, it's like it can actually be like that's the point at which you can learn so much and you can grow and things can get so much better, which I think is really interesting.
But there's also that's another reason why I got published actually after that, because I wrote a piece talking about my diagnosis and the responses that I got to it, because I've been very open about it since it happened, because people do treat you different. I'm like, well, the only way we're going to get through this is normalizing it.
Right.
There's a lot of misconceptions about bipolar and OCD.
Right.
Not everyone with OCD is, I got to clean.
Right.
Even though, we do that too.
Right.
But, and bipolar isn't where you're just laughing and then crying and then angry and then it's just, that's not what it is. And so people don't know. And a lot of people are, again, I was misdiagnosed since the age of 16. I'd been I knew something wasn't wrong or wasn't right my whole life. Yeah. I was born stressed out. I always say that. Like, I pulled all-nighters in elementary school, and I'm not even kidding. Like, that's just how stressed out I was. So I always knew something wasn't right, but what happens a lot of times is you don't go to the doctor when you feel good.
Sure.
And I never had a manic episode that was like something that was disruptive in my life. If anything, it was, being hypomanic was kind of a good place to be in.
Yeah.
But you go in for the depression. And so antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, what they give you, because you have all this anxiety because, your equilibrium is not right. Yeah. Problem is, antidepressants aren't so great for people with bipolar disorder.
Right.
And so I went through a lot of phases from my life where I would start medication because I would start to feel really bad. Yeah. And then I would have to stop it. And then I would go through ability to stability, because that's what happens with bipolar, especially, like I said, I'm lucky in the sense that mine's a bit more mild than the extreme cases. Yeah. And then I'd, would eventually get back to the point. And so it was really hard sometimes in school. I realized it was a seasonal thing too, because I would just be ready to go, and then I just have no motivation. And I just, and so getting that diagnosis, getting on the proper medication, I was so sedated for so long that I forgot what it was like to be myself. Right. And I had to readjust to that and readjust to feeling things. Well, I wasn't taking medication until I got on new medication that worked. Yeah. And so it was just something I was very vocal about, just because things could have been so different had I known that so much younger.
So much earlier, right.
Yeah, and I'm just lucky that it was never something that was stigmatized in my household, whereas for some people that's very much the case. And so I talk about it openly so that I just don't care what you think anymore. It's, it's sometimes some of the most troubling parts of you are the parts you don't like about yourself are also some of the best parts about yourself. Right. And so recognizing that, and then also, though, saying, hey, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And how can I be a better version of me?
Yeah. So, and I think it's like when people are uncomfortable both expressing it and then also recognizing it in themselves, that creates all these other problems for them, right?
Absolutely.
They don't see themselves, or they fight against their nature, or they feel shame, or all of these things that happen that are really, really, really bad for your well-being.
And so, so I went back, and I was, at that point, was kind of starting to get, in a place where I felt healthy mentally and physically, and was like, okay, what's the next step for me? Right. And so from there, and I'm lucky enough, I have an amazing husband who was the opposite of past relationships I had. It was very much like, we're going to, whatever it is you need to do, we're
Right.
going to do it. And just been so supportive. And so, yeah, I was like, how can I take this to the next step? And so started looking at jobs, was hired on as a floating manager for a chain of Irish pubs.
Okay.
And was doing the floating manager. So you would go from one location to one location, you would kind of fill in, and then eventually you would move up into different areas of, it was corporate,
Right.
kind of not corporate. They ran it very much like, we want Irish hospitality to be a thing.
Right, sure.
Which I appreciate that.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, I can get kind of the best of both.
Yeah.
And then 4 days later, COVID happened.
Oh gosh. Oh. So you had decided you were going to go back into hospitality.
Yeah. And so,
Wow.
so fourth day, I worked in,
Oh my
in Huntington. No, not Huntington. I worked in Newport Beach. And then they did 1 day in Manhattan. And then they were like, oh, everything's shutting down. So I was like, okay. Didn't really know what to expect. Luckily, one good thing about living the way that I've lived my whole life and what I've dealt with, I was like, well, I've been gearing for this my entire life.
Okay.
My mom has contamination OCD as well, so I literally
okay.
have been
Wow.
like,
Okay.
I was like, I'm prepared. So I didn't have to deal with, I think that what was the good that came out of the pandemic, I think, was that a lot of people who had never really experienced depression or anxiety in that kind of way
Right.
really saw what it's
Right.
like. And
Right.
so everyone else who kind of suffered with that, were like, well, yeah. I
this is
can
what
imagine
it's
like
like,
that
yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And so it
And
really,
so that really normalized it.
wellness and mental wellness has become
For sure.
almost commoditized in a certain way. But that being said, it's really great that we're kind of focusing on that in a way that we've never been focusing on that
Right.
before. But yeah, so I was lucky enough they retained me on salary, which was
okay.
great.
So that's probably one advantage of corporate versus mom and pop, right? Because
Right.
mom and pop wouldn't have been able to, might not have been able to afford it.
There was a lot of people that weren't kept on.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have been able to do it for so long. I ended up getting transferred over, though, to Seal Beach, which is in Orange County, which
Okay.
was very loose on COVID.
Yes.
Regulations.
I live in Orange County, so I know.
Yeah, and so that was a whole other interesting experience, diving into managing a bar
Right.
during COVID in a
Right.
place that really was, particularly that town, anti-mask, there was a lot of social issues that
Yeah.
were a problem.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, the biggest reason why I didn't last with that company. There was just a lot of bigotry in that area,
Yeah.
a lot of sexism, a lot of homophobia, especially that Black Lives Matter happening, and
Yeah.
there were marches. And for me, I'm not Switzerland.
But this wasn't this was Seal Beach? It
Seal
wasn't
Beach, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
I don't know enough
so-
about it.
yeah.
I know Huntington Beach was like that because
Yeah.
I mean, there's some
And
interesting experiences that friends and I have had.
It was just so weird because Long Beach is literally the next city over, and it's a
Yeah.
world apart.
Interesting.
And it was.
But anyway, you were saying you're not Switzerland.
Yeah, so a lot of the managers would be like, I'm just going to stay out of it,
Right.
Type of thing. And being racist or sexist or homophobic is not a political stance.
Right.
And I'm not going to allow that
And you're not just gonna
because
sit there.
my staff should feel safe.
Yes.
My customers should all feel safe.
Yes.
And once that becomes something that's okay,
Yep.
which it was clearly,
Right.
I couldn't, it just wasn't for me in that area. And so went back to Gallagher's one more time,
Okay.
just for good measure.
That's funny. I do want to point out, for those of you who did not catch the historical reference, Switzerland has been neutral in the world wars and is sort of minding their own business while the rest of Europe was tearing itself apart. So that was the point behind that.
Yeah.
By the way. But anyway, so you went back to Gallagher's.
Back to Gallagher's.
Okay.
And so at this point, this is when I'm like, hey, I want to get into the craft scene. And where am I going to get in a way that's going to, I was looking in trying to find education and resources. Unfortunately, when you look up like bar education or cocktail education online, you just get bartending schools.
Right.
So disclaimer for anyone who is interested, do not go to bartending school.
Right.
Don't do it. Doesn't mean don't get educated. There are a lot of really great resources out there like Bar Smarts and Bar Starts, which you can get for free. There are a lot of other resources like that I did not know were available that,
Right.
Even now I use all the time. And, but yeah, just don't go to bartending school. That's all I gotta
Right.
say.
It's not worth- it doesn't
Just start,
help enough.
just get in there, let people know that's what you want, and you gotta work your way up.
So start as a bar back or whatever. if you can
Yeah,
get
or
in
a
and
server,
or a
whatever the case
server or
may be.
whatever, and just-
Because that's That's how it goes,
Yeah.
you know? You
Yep.
got to put in the legwork, you
Yep.
know? So I was like, yeah, you know, I really want to delve into craft. And so I started, you know, looking at resources, and it was like LA at that time was where the craft cocktail scene was really thriving. Long Beach didn't really have that at that time. Like I said earlier,
Yep.
that's evolving quite a bit.
Yep.
Problem with LA at that time was it was very cliquey and gatekeeping. And
Okay.
so getting into those craft cocktail bars was very difficult.
Right.
I had to apply as a cocktail server in order to get an interview.
Wow.
And I'd managed bars and
Right.
had been doing this a very long time. But, you know, it was a different world.
Yeah.
So Clifton's at that time was reopening. I don't know if you're familiar with Clifton's.
Oh, yeah.
It was a cafeteria.
Right.
That was like
with
the
all
history.
the crazy stuff inside, the
Yes.
really interesting.
Look up the history
Yeah,
of Clifton's. It's
yeah.
really incredible. If you get a chance, I highly recommend it. They did a lot of political activism and some really great. The history is astounding. But that's, you know, do research. It's really cool. And
Yeah, Clifton's was on the list of things I wanted. My wife and I wanted to go there, and then it
such
closed
an
down
amazing space.
with the-
And so
COVID and
they
stuff.
were reopening
Okay.
as like this 4-story immersive cocktail bar experience.
Yeah.
And so I was a cocktail server for one day. The person who was the beverage director, she interviewed me. She was like, "Why are you applying as a cocktail server?" I was like, "Because no one heard of me."
Right.
So she goes, "All right." And so next day I was one of the lead of like the exclusive bar up there. It was like the tiki bar, and it was like so much fun, and I
Right.
was learning so much. And at that point I was just like, I was really, really excited about it. And so I was like, you know, I always wanted to be a chef. Like I said, when I was young too, that was
Right.
like really what I was first interested in career-wise. And so it was becoming a lot more culinary. And I was like, oh man, like there's just this whole world I didn't know existed or didn't know how to access, rather. And yeah, I had a lot of fun there. And eventually they left. There was issues, you know, dealing with upper man. It's like the better the manager, kind of the faster they went. But eventually it shut down. I had left, the beverage director left. She had got me a job as a bar manager at a craft neighborhood bar around the street.
Okay.
And so that was kind of with the preface that I would become the GM of that location. The current GM at that time was planning on leaving.
Right.
And so, you know, you can manage the bar program. I'm going to teach you everything I know. And then eventually you'll be primed to run this spot. And then, you know, I saw you had mentioned talking about challenges in your career. And this is probably the most challenging job I ever had. But it led to a lot of really great things. So everything was great. I was doing ordering. I was learning things. He was talking to all of our people and was like, you know, she's very competent in what she does, and was really giving me a lot of autonomy behind the bar and how I kind of wanted to see the direction and if I thought changes need to happen or if I had ideas, it was very much like, this is our bar, you know. It was great.
Right.
One day for a weekend, I went to Texas for a wedding. I come back and there's this younger guy behind the bar, and I go, "Are you a new bartender?" Which is already weird on the bar manager.
Right.
There's a new bartender. He goes, "No, I'm your new GM."
Oh.
I'm like, what? So the current GM, who was our prior, sitting at the table, and he just looks at me and he's like, "Well, I'm going to North Carolina."
Oh.
The owner, you know, if you haven't been here so long, he trusts this guy that worked at a breakfast shop for him somewhere else.
Okay.
And so, you know, this is not a reflection of you. We're still looking to buy other things. And like we said, maybe we can get something in Long Beach. And like, you definitely have a future here. There's no reflection on your performance.
Right.
It's just the timing ended up being different than we thought. I go, okay, I get that.
Right.
The communication could have been much better.
Right.
You kind of made me look a little stupid, but
Yeah.
sure, you know, I'll put that faith in you. And I go, I'm going to lay it out there that I want to make sure I can have a discussion with this new GM. I don't want to step on any toes.
Right.
I want to make sure that we can work together. I go, you know, my experience in the past, sometimes gender inequity can be an issue, and I just want to make sure that, you know, everything's copacetic, basically. Sure, yeah, no, we're going to let you know he's going to be in the back, you know, the back side of things, and he's going to need to lean on you all day for support, you know, and this is your bar still, and that's your staff, and that just wasn't the case. And, you know, it was frustrating, mind you. This person did not know how to use Excel.
Okay.
He did not know how to shakes a martini, and if you're in that industry, you just don't do that. Didn't know how to change a keg for a craft beer program.
Okay.
And I'm like, meanwhile, I've been doing this a very long time. I have a degree in management, and I just So I sat down with them again, and I was like, hey, look, like, am I really going to go somewhere here? Right. I need to know.
Right.
And they go, oh, the owner goes, you're being irrational.
Oh.
And then he goes, I mean, your feelings are not warranted. This is not where it's going to go. So I just brought up issues again with gender.
Especially gender and equity. When you hear the word irrational, right? I mean, this is one of those
and
things.
I was like, okay, you know, and at that point in my life, I was like, I'm not going to put up with things like this anymore, you know? So eventually we had our Thursday meetings every week, management meetings. Yeah. And now that the prior GM was gone, I started getting scheduled during my management weeks, my management meetings. So I was working while they were meeting.
Right.
Then they stopped scheduling me during the days that were the management meetings were taking place. And then I got fired for the first time in my life.
Oh, wow.
I go to walk up, and they're standing in the lobby. It was in like an apartment complex in downtown. And he goes, you're really great at what you do. We think you'll be happier somewhere else. And he handed me my check.
Wow.
And I was like, I mean, he wasn't wrong.
Right.
But that being said, I was like, how do you tell someone they're great at their job and also they're fired in the same sentence? And I was just, I was like, okay. So I'm lucky enough that I built a lot of relationships with the bars around there. And so the bar across the street picked me up that weekend, paid me the same amount as I was getting paid to manage to bartend there.
Okay.
And took care of me ultimately. Okay. And so
that's great.
They go, and they were regulars. They'd go in on their breaks and stuff, you know, at the bar. And they, the new GM at the place I was at, he goes, you know, don't steal any more of my employees. They're like, she was a free agent. You put her up. We just picked her up, you know? And so after that, I started looking at, like, what are resources for women in the bar industry?
Right.
And started looking in. So I was researching. I found Speed Rack, which Speed Rack is an all-femme speed bartending competition that raises money for breast cancer.
Okay.
And it was started, this will be season 12 this year in New York because the craft cocktail scene did not have a lot of women in it.
Right.
And the guy goes, we need women. There aren't any female bartenders, you know? And they're like, yes, there is.
Right.
And so they created this competition, and it's a craft cocktail competition where you go head-to-head bracketed speed to pour. Not only can they do it faster than you, but they can do it better than you. And it's just basically in a way to give women a platform and then raise money for a good cause.
Yeah.
And so I found this. So I wrote about my experience at that bar.
I see. Yeah.
And I got in. And
this is the first
competition I ever did. Okay. Yeah. And I almost didn't do it because I was like, I'd never even been to Speed Rack. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And so luckily the culmination of like having free poured before, things like that definitely helped. Not that it's required, but I went, there was a regionals in San Diego at Bartenders Weekend, which I did not know was a thing. Okay. It's also a thing. So I did that, and I didn't know anybody there. Right. There's a lot of things like that. I just started putting myself in a room. It was very awkward. People would always be like, who are you here with? I'm like, me, you know? But I was like, I want to get into this. Right. And so, yeah, showed up there and made stage in regionals by 1 second. Got it handed to me on stage because that's another piece of advice is like, follow your gut. Right. Sometimes when you try to do things other people's way, you know, it's good to take advice. I will never say I know everything. I think that if you think you know everything, you know nothing.
Yeah.
But also at the end of the day, what works best for you is what works best for you.
Right.
And not everybody learns or thinks in the same kind of way.
Right.
And so...
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, right? You need to have some ability to take in information from other people, but you also need to know when to be like, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but...
This is what works for me.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you're neurodivergent or in certain things, the process that works for some people is not the process that works for others.
Yep.
And, you know, but it was a lot of fun. I met so many incredible women, and they ended up doing a wild card. So there's multiple regions.
Okay.
And the winners of those regions all get flown out to New Orleans where they do Tales of the Cocktail, which is like the largest cocktail convention. And it's been going on a long time. And I did not know that they have Tales. I'm like, what is Tales? You know, it's like the slang for it's Tales of the Cocktail. Yeah. And there's a lot of education there. They have a bunch of seminars, and you can learn so many things about every aspect of the industry.
So it's interesting, right? Because you had been in this world for quite a long time.
Long time.
And yet hadn't known about these things.
None of it. None of it.
That's so interesting.
People almost don't believe me when I tell them, I'm like, there's a lot of bartenders like that.
Right.
And so that was something I wanted to put out for here for Long Beach because I'm like, had I known, I could have focused my career in such a
Right.
way that, I'm sure there's a lot of people that leave the industry that do love what they did.
Right.
But, at the end, it's not a quote unquote real job.
Right.
And so I ended up submitting a wild card video. So they had a thing on where you submit a video of doing a round,
Okay.
so you get 4 cocktails.
Okay.
So basically, for prelims, because for not familiar with Speed Rack, you have a list of 8 to 12 classic cocktails,
Right.
and they're going to call 4 at random.
Okay.
Then everyone who was chosen to be a part of that group goes in one by one and does it as fast as they can for the judges, and the top 8 times after penalties. So
Right.
the drink has to be good, has to be balanced, has to have the right ingredients.
Right.
It's not as strict as on stage, but it still has to be correct.
Okay.
And the top 8 go bracketed head-to-head on stage.
Okay.
And so, and the winner, like I said, goes to tails, and
Yeah.
they compete in, the U.S. finals. They did a wild card, so they gave you a round, and you made a video of yourself making the 4 cocktails. And I got picked for that as one of the wild card people and got to compete in New Orleans.
Wow.
And so, first time I ever got to go there,
Yeah.
and I was 3rd in prelims.
Okay.
And then I lost to the winner, so I was not mad. I was
Right.
like, "You beat me, you beat everybody," and she
Right.
did. She was so good.
Wow.
But just met so many people there, and getting picked up from then, you get sponsored on a team, and these teams are sponsored by brands, and then you're connected with women from all over the United States,
Right.
because there were multiple wild cards, and then you're put together so that you can connect those women and you help each other train.
Right.
And so everybody helped each other. It wasn't one of those competitions like, no, we all trained together.
Right.
And
So it's a little bit more
collaborative than
like kind of a more British bake-off than a chopped thing.
yeah, totally. Like on stage, you're like, I'm going to go.
Right,
but
of course.
it's one of those things where if you have to bring somebody else down in order to win, you're not that
Right.
good.
Right.
And so everyone's there to help each other out. It's, for instance, like the girl that crushed me on stage in San Diego also got wild carded in. And everything that could have gone wrong for her in prelims at nationals did.
Oh.
And so I saw her come out because she's fast, man. Like she wiped the floor with most people. Amy Jo, she's great.
Huh.
But, she had the pour spout, fall out, all that. And I saw the tears, like, she came out because you train for that,
Yeah, right.
And she's like, okay, everything I have now is yours. And that's how it is. All the garnishes, how can I help you if you get because on stage in nationals, it could be like, you have to make up cocktails on the spot, too.
Right.
So she's like, I know what that judge likes, and this is what, and how can I help you get you ready? And that, for me, was just,
cool.
like, such a special thing, and
Yeah.
that's how everyone there was. And it's this community that was really life-changing.
Right. That's
And-
really great. And you had no idea it existed.
No idea. It was only
Right.
because I got fired for
Right.
bringing up gender inequity.
Right.
Then I ended up stumbling across this. And in the interim, what had happened was I was at the Rhythm Room, and, like, they're great. I love that bar so much. They're only open they're a weekend type of bar.
Right.
And so they helped me train there, and then I got hired at Accomplice through people I'd met, and that was where I started training.
Okay.
And so they started putting on, we had events where other girls would come here, and we would do, a practice round. Customers would buy, they'd take 4 cocktails, and all the
Right.
money went to breast cancer.
Okay.
And so we would do events out of it. And so my point being, I guess, to backtrack a little bit of, like, being 8th place in regionals to getting 3rd in prelims and nationals, that's all community. That's
Right.
community and training. That's not necessarily like I'm that good. Like, that just goes to show, like, what having some support
Right.
can really do for you,
Right.
in a small amount of time, and having a place to practice and having the ingredients, because it's very intimidating, I think, for younger bartenders, because you have all of these different, spirits or liqueurs or ingredients that you're not familiar with, and if you don't have access to it,
Right.
and you can't afford it, how are you going to learn how to make it or taste it or know what it's supposed
Yeah.
to taste like? And so having that, community, and it was really helpful. I got to go to the Patron Hacienda. I was on Team Bacardi, and so Patron was a big part of that.
Right.
They flew me out to the Hacienda. It was one of, like, the first times I got to go out of the country. That was incredible. Met so many people there. And, so then I got to eventually just all these opportunities started opening up. After Speed Rack, that just changed everything. And that was when I got into competitive bartending, really. So I know we were going to delve into that a little bit, but...
So from that point on, so then you're working, right, at Accomplice Bar, And then sort of on the side, you're like,
I'm just trying to educate myself as much as I can. I got involved in Chilled 100, which Chilled is a magazine.
right.
And you can apply for that. And they have bartenders. They offer, different educational. I got to go to Elevate. And you said your father was a bartender. You know Dale DeGraw, who that is?
So
he's like the godfather of the modern cocktail.
Okay.
Like he brought back the modern cocktail. And, he's teaching a seminar. And these people are doing seminars. And, there's so many resources and opportunities. I'm like, what? Mind blown,
Yeah.
So I just started doing that. There was, Portland Cocktail Week. I started taking classes and just started, connecting with people as much as I could, getting involved in the community as much as I could, and started getting into competitions. And so I did the second competition I really did. It was the Florida Cognac. They do the most sustainable bartender challenge.
Okay.
And so I placed regionally on the West Coast for that. And then Patron Perfectionist, which is the big one,
Yeah.
And so that is a competition where, you get into the globals. They're very much about education and about mentorship. And having already been and seeing, I just had a lot more respect after going to the Hacienda and seeing how it's made there and how they treat their people there by the people that work there. And I'm friends with them now, you know, and so I just had a lot of respect for them after that and was like, okay, I'm going to enter in this. And had to make a margarita based on your favorite city. And so I did that on Oaxaca because I got to, with Convite, through another different group that I had met, I got to go to Oaxaca for a week, guest bartend, and learn about their mezcal all for free. And then I did a round table, so I got to teach over there, and it's just been so incredible.
It's so interesting, right? Because it's gone from being like, well, here's this part-time job I have while I'm going to college, and I can pay for my bills, and it's like this thing that I don't know, I got to get away from it eventually and go into corporate. Yeah. And now it's like this entire profession where you can actually work to the point of attaining like a level of excellence. Right, that's. I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? This idea of like,
it's insane.
You could train and learn and be part of this big community and go really far, like in this world that you didn't really even know existed. It's so interesting, right? From something that you just weren't even thinking about at all.
Right, and getting to be creative, getting to use because it's become very culinary in a lot of ways.
Right.
Getting to use that, you can, writing articles. And so I got to go back to doing certain writings and things like that. And I've always wanted to travel. I just never had the money to travel.
Right.
And so having the opportunity, last year I got to go to Mexico 4 times. And now I'm going to be back there in May for the global finals.
Right.
And, after that, now I'm going to have all these opportunities. They say, it's important to win, or everyone wants to win, rather.
Sure.
It's not important in winning. It's what you do with this opportunity.
Right.
And so a lot of the people I've met that end up being very big in their careers actually did not win.
Right.
Most of the time they don't,
Right.
And so...
But they're there, they're making connections, they're learning, they're getting exposure.
Right.
People are hearing about them, so there's all kinds of...
And Patron invests, even the people that don't make it to globals, if you make it to globals, they stand by you. They help you out with mentorship, education, opportunities. They're very much about fostering that community.
Right.
And so they're like, I want to see what you do because I want to bring that back to my community. So that's been one of my biggest goals with that, I guess, is to give young bartenders the opportunities that I didn't know weren't there at the time. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, there's so much you can do. It's not just like you said, meantime, you could be a brand ambassador.
Right.
You can run your own bar. You can be a beverage director. You can be a consultant. You could be, crafting your own menus, competing, traveling. There's so many opportunities now that I just really wish I knew a long time ago,
Yeah, but you know it now, and it kind of sounds like you're killing it, right?
I'm the worst at that. I'm not good at taking compliments at all.
Well, you're doing decently.
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah. But that's all support. That's all community too. I can't take full credit for that,
Sure.
There's quite a few people that helped me get there.
Yeah.
And
so advice, I guess, in terms of like what's your perspective on how does one go about making connections and making meaningful connections with people and how do you find mentors and how do you do all these things? What's a good path for doing that or a good mindset for doing that? Or
so there's there's quite a few things. So there's a couple bartenders I met out here. Long Beach has a bartenders guild as well.
Okay.
And they do free education for bartenders. They do a couple different events. They started up, like I said, the craft movement here, like Baby G's that opened up. Incredible bar. Highly recommend if you're of age.
Right, yeah.
And so there's this renaissance happening here. So I always said, like, at the time I started working in LA, it was because LA had the craft, but they didn't necessarily have the community at that time.
Right.
Whereas Long Beach had the community, but didn't really have the craft.
I see.
And now they're both,
right.
moving in the opposite direction. There's been a big push. I think COVID changed the industry.
Right.
Some ways were difficult, but some were for the best because a lot of people left the industry, and there's a lot of really hungry new bartenders that are really excited. And so it's just about fostering people who like really care about what they do. Yeah. And so I would say, look anew if you're local in the Long Beach Bartenders Guild or your local guild. The USBG, you have Diageo Bar Academy. You have, obviously, Patron Academy. You have that on there. Lush Life is another one that does events. They have Bartenders Weekend. They do Portland Cocktail Week. They do quite a few different things. Yeah. Another rally is they gave out all the grants during COVID. Okay. They actually sent me to Oaxaca to study as well. Wow. That was the first time, actually. Okay. I take that back. The first time I ever went to Mexico was because I wrote out all these essays. A lot of times you have to apply. You got to write a lot in order to get in because they're spending a lot of money and they want to make sure that you really care about what you're doing and that.
So that's interesting, though, because that means that sort of like that college background is actually really helpful for that. Then.
It's been helpful for a lot of things in so many different ways, especially when you get into more management aspects of it, but also just like working on a team. Yeah. Not everyone loves group projects. Right. I can't say that I always do myself, but like having to do that and having to get up and speak in front of people. Right. Because some of the competitions where it's just crazy like Speed Rack and you're just making fast drinks. Yeah. Patron, you have to get up there and you have to speak the whole time and you have to tell a story and you have to engage people. It's not just about the cocktails, more about the story and the storytelling. And so that I think you can gain a lot here as well. And then if you want to run a bar, things like that, obviously management matters a lot. All the things are very, very applicable. So I'm really glad, especially if you want to run a bar or own a bar, it helps to have all the different things. Yeah. Another one, you have Lush Life, you have, like I said, Chilled does a bunch of different stuff. Tales is up, Tales of the Cocktail. Yeah. They have an organization. They do a lot of education on there. There's a lot of grants on there. There are a lot of resources available to bartenders, whether or not they're a part of the guild or not. If you need like assistance or like a disaster or a medical emergency or things like that, there are groups out there. We raise money particularly for that will help you pay if you're dealing with like a life-changing catastrophic event. Right. Like I said, another rally gave out those COVID loans for hospitality people and their families. Okay. And so that was kind of how I learned more about that because then I started getting their newsletter and then I got these opportunities. And so I would say that go to bars that you are interested in what they're doing and talk to the bartenders and say, hey, and honestly, just like we got to work your way up. Right. But make your expectations clear, I guess, also.
Well, and you also have to have that curiosity. You have to have that desire to improve, the desire to learn more, right? I think that's
but also knowing where to look for those resources. Like I said, like if you go online, Bar Smarts and Bar Starts, like I said, does very deep classes. You can get discount codes where they're free or your work can get it for free. It's like $29 if not. Okay. But I'm happy to give out my Instagram or something. So if anyone's interested and wanting to know, like I'll connect you in any way I can.
You want to do that now?
It's Manic Attack Vintage. All spelled out, normal. MANICATTACK And shoot me a message. I'm happy to share anything I know, any connections, or if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help.
So you're really deep in this and learning a lot and doing a lot. I'm curious if what the sort of work-life balance is like in this particular type of field.
That's tough for sure. I never had a normal schedule in my life. So 9 to 5 just wasn't for me in general. Sure. That doesn't work obviously for everybody. You got to find, it's very easy to especially even like a party type of bar, to get caught up in a lifestyle that is just not sustainable.
Right.
You got to take care of your body.
Yeah.
You know, you're on your feet all the time. It is physically exhaustive as well. And emotionally and mentally exhaustive. Like, it's great taking care of people, but also you can get dumped on all day. You know, you got to make sure to take care of your own mind and, you know, with relationships too, and making sure you find the time, which is hard enough as it is the older you get, to find time for relationships, not just romantic relationships, but your personal relationships, family relationships. But I won't say it's necessarily easy. You just have to do it. You have to make the time to do it, I guess.
So it's just setting it aside, making it a priority.
Yeah, you got to put it on your schedule. You have to make it a priority, because otherwise it's just very easy to get caught up in that, especially when you're working late nights and, you know, maybe you can't get up at 6 a.m. when you're going to bed at 4 a.m.
Sure.
And so finding a schedule that works for you also, you know, they're, like you were saying earlier, there are day shifts too. And sometimes that's also a better way to learn, because it's not as busy and you have more time to kind of get familiar with things.
Right.
And so you have that opportunity there too. And I think what's great about this industry is it's a little bit easier to structure your schedule the way that you want it.
Okay.
So whereas a lot of jobs, it's 9 to 5, that's all you have.
Monday through Friday.
You can kind of build your own schedule, especially around school.
Right.
You know, that's kind of where most people get that general idea from. But, you know, when people have children, things like that, you can kind of, you know, work your schedule a little bit easier rather than a lot of other occupations.
Okay, cool. And then I guess, so I'm just kind of curious, like, success. Like now that you're in this situation, how do you define success, and what does it mean to you?
I mean, success is so relative. For me, being rich was never a vision of success for me. Right. I wanted to travel. I want to learn. I constantly want to learn, experience new things. I think giving back is what is success to me. Okay. Like when you can get enough to give, and seeing how, you know, a lot of times people will say like, well, if I had to do it and I had to go through this, now everyone should have to do that, even if it's not what makes sense. Right. Whereas for me, I'm like, take everything I know. Like, let me help you so you can be better than me. Right. You know, like, if you get mad a lot of times too, like, this used to be a bigger thing where people kind of keep you down at the bar because they don't want you to leave. Right. Like, no one, you know, they don't want to promote you because you're so good at bussing or bar backing. You know, there was a lot of ego in the industry, and that's just not cutting it anymore. Yeah. And so it's kind of nice to see that part of the industry die. It was a very mustachioed arm garter thing that, you know, super pretentious, where it was just very difficult for someone who doesn't know about craft cocktails to even come in and have a drink and feel comfortable having a drink. Right. Where it's like, we don't serve vodka here. Whereas like now it's like, we take what we do seriously behind the bar, and there's a lot of really cool science like techniques that we're using too, which is a whole other thing. If you're interested in chemistry, it's gotten really, really fun. But also not taking yourself so seriously. Like, take your cocktail seriously, don't take yourself seriously. People like what they like. I don't, you know, if you want it really sweet and you want a sugar rim, who am I to tell you no? Right. You know? And so, yeah, it's changed a lot in that way. So people get comfortable. And the pandemic, a lot of people started making cocktails. Right. You know, you had the Netflix show, Drink Masters, that came out. And also people on there got their thing through Speed Rack. One of the people, her bartenders, was on my Speed Rack team. Oh, wow. Okay. So it's really cool now getting to know those people that I was watching on television not that long ago. But people, you know, engaged in it enough, it's back for a second season. And so now the customers are also more informed. Right. But they're also more curious. And so that allows, you know, you to teach a little bit more. Right. And it allows them to not be so stuffy. And it builds this community of people that are excited about what they're drinking, excited to be there, and you're excited to share. And everyone learns. And it's been like so much fun.
Huh. That's cool.
I'm just so glad to see the changes that are happening. We just still need more inclusion. So that's my other part of success is to get. I just hate when someone calls it a neighborhood bar and no one looks like the neighborhood, you know? Yeah. And so getting to see different types of people behind the bar in the craft scene. Right. Like that's where the disparity, I think, lies a lot, is between, you know, neighborhood bars, sports bars, which those bars are great. I made some of the best money I ever made at those bars and like, the best friends I ever made. But that's where the access, that gap is lacking, you know? And so that's, I guess, my success is to kind of bring up people and show people what this industry can be about, what community can be about, and that this is a career.
Yeah.
It can be a job. There's so many things you can do in it. It's not just bartending. You don't have to do that forever either. There's opportunities and places. And so, yeah, being able to give back, being happy, healthy, having my family be happy, healthy, and my husband be happy, healthy, and friends, and just do what makes you happy.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
it. At the end of the day, life is very short.
Yep. And when it's over, it's over.
And sometimes it could you just don't know.
Yeah.
You be walking down the sidewalk, and I hope that happens to nobody here, but you just don't know. And so without being, don't blow all your money out the window and not plan for the future, but life is far, far too short to do something that makes you miserable.
Yeah.
So if you could do something you love, and I can help you if you like it, I'm more than happy to share on how to, make something out of it.
That's cool. So what's next for you?
So other than, like I said, Patron is in May,
and
Speed Rack's coming up again. I said last year I wanted to make stage. This year I want to win.
Okay.
So I'm waiting for them to put out applications. So lady bartenders apply, Speed Rack. That should be coming out in the next month or so. And so I've been doing those competitions and then maybe doing some guest bartending. I really want to get to travel around.
Okay.
Go to some different countries and see how other bars are doing it and what they're doing within their communities and sustainability and how I can bring that back. So then eventually down the line that I can open my own bar.
Right.
And so that's really the ultimate vision is to have my own space.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's really cool. It's kind of inspiring is to think that there's all the stuff that you can do in terms of going around and seeing what's happening in different places around the world and how this industry is evolving and what communities look like there. And
yeah, and just community is so important in general.
Yeah.
It really, really is.
And bars, I think, are really central to a lot of places, sort of communities.
I mean, bars are where the hubs of society started because it's where you got clean water.
Right.
So society and civilization all starts around a bar.
Yeah.
If you think about it that way, it's always been a community meeting point and a place where people should, and like I said, now it's definitely getting more than ever, be able to walk in and feel comfortable and feel welcome and feel, heard, and a place to meet and discuss things openly and have these important conversations about, their lives, about society, about, what's going on, and discussing ways in which we can, just do better for our world and the people around us, so.
That's really cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's been so much fun to be here, yeah.
Yeah, it's been really, really fascinating for me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've learned so much, so thank you so much for coming in.
It's been my pleasure, absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you all for joining us today at Beyond the Beach. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And if you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And for those of you who want to go the extra mile, please consider leaving a review or comment. Thank you.
Thank you.